Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Before we get into tonight's game, I wanted to ask a question. Do you have extra cards lying around that you don't use? Want to buy or trade for some extra cards but don't know how to maximize the value? Then you should try out today's sponsor, Card Conduit. Card Conduit is the best service when it comes to selling your extra cards. They have three main services. Their standard service lets you send them your unsorted cards of any value. They will sort, grade, and give you the best price for your cards. Their curated service is similar. Send them your unsorted cards worth over $1 in value. They will charge half the fee of the standard service and charge no fee per card. Their sorted service is a great value as well. Choose cards in advance with their selection tool, send them sorted to Card Conduit, and they will grade and buy list them automatically. Save yourself the time of having to send to multiple sites and let Card Conduit do it instead. Their fee is only 2% with no fee per card. So give Card Conduit a try today. If you sign up with my link in the description below or use the promo code POWER, you will also get 10% off of their fees when you use their service. A big thanks to Card Conduit for sponsoring today's video.
Now let's showcase our fighters this evening. First we have John piloting Chatterfang, Squirrel General. This Golgari Chain of Smog list seeks to get Witherbloom Apprentice or Professor Onyx onto the board, then cast Chain of Smog to drain out the table. His opening hand contains Command Tower, City of Brass, Runic Armasaur, Bayou, Natural Order, and a Mox Diamond. His London Mulligan is a crop rotation. Next, we have Playing with Power member Alana piloting Talion the Kindly Lord. This Dimir list wants to cast its commander as soon as possible, gain massive advantage from opponent spells, then drain them through Bloodchief's Ascension. Her opening hand contains a Toxic Deluge, Chrome Mox, Odawara Soaring City, Ancient Tomb, and a Weathered Runestone. Her London Mulligans are a Pact of Negation and a Defense Grid. Third, we have Playing with Power member Ashani, piloting Rograkh, Son of Rograkh, and Thrasios Triton Hero. This Teamer list wants to get Eternal Witness and Teamer Sabertooth onto the battlefield to cast Lightning Bolt and recur it to hand infinitely. His opening hand contains an offer you can't refuse, Bloodstained Mire, Phantasmal Image, Ragavan Nimble Pilferer, Beseju Who Endures, Basalt Monolith, and a Birds of Paradise. And lastly, we have Philip, piloting Roxanne, Starfall Savant. This Gruul list ramps fast and wins with Twin Flame Dualcaster Mage style combos. His opening hand contains Arbor Elf, Grove of the Burn Willows, Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, Elven Chorus, and Cursed Mirror. His London Mulligans are a Cloudstone Curio and a Deflecting Swat. John won the Pepper Chicken Challenge and gets to go first. John draws for turn and plays a Command Tower. He taps it for a Soul Ring, then casts a Mox Diamond, discarding a Bayou to the Diamond's trigger. He casts Chatterfang, Squirrel General, then passes. Alana draws, then plays an Ancient Tomb. She taps the tomb, losing 2 life, then casts Weathered Runestone. She passes the turn to Ashani. Ashani draws, then plays a Bloodstained Mire as his land for turn. He cracks the Mire, paying 1 life, then fetches a Steam Fence onto the battlefield untapped, paying an additional 2 life. He casts Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer, then ships the turn. Philip draws, then plays Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth. He taps Yavimaya to cast an Arbor Elf, then passes. John draws his card for turn, then plays a Bloodstained Mire. He cracks the Mire, losing 1 life, and fetches a Swamp. He taps out for a Runic Armasaur. He moves to combat and attacks Alana with Chatterfang. Alana takes the 3, and John passes. Alana draws and plays an Odawara as her land for turn. She casts Chrome Mox, exiling a Toxic Deluge to the Mox's imprint trigger. She casts Talion, the Kindly Lord. Talion enters, Alana names 2, then passes. Ashani draws, plays a Windswept Teeth, then cracks it, paying a life. This triggers Runic Armasaur, and John draws. Then Ashani searches his library and finds a tropical island. Ashani moves to combat and attacks Philip with Ragavan. Philip takes the 2 damage, and Ashani creates a treasure token and exiles a Magus of the Moon off of the top of Philip's library. Ashani casts a Phantasmal Image. The image enters, and Ashani copies Talion with the image, naming 1. Ashani then casts Springleaf Drum. He taps Talion with the drum in order to cast a Birds of Paradise, then passes the turn. Philip draws, then casts a Gamble, triggering Ashani's Talion. Philip takes the 2, and Ashani draws a card. He searches for a card and puts it into his hand, then discards a card at random, losing Cursed Mirror. He taps Arbor Elf to untap a land. This triggers John's Runic Armasaur, and John draws a card. He casts Dockside Extortionist, triggering Alana's Talion. Philip loses 2 life, and Alana draws a card. In response, Alana casts Subtlety, pitching a Mystical Tutor to pay for its alternative casting cost. Philip decides to put Dockside back on top of his library. Then, his hopes dashed, passes the turn. John untaps and draws for turn. He plays City of Brass. He casts Deathrite Shaman, triggering Ashani's Talion. John loses 2 life, and Ashani draws a card. John moves to combat. He swings at Ashani with Chatterfang and Armasaur. Ashani takes 5 damage, then John passes. Alana untaps, then draws for turn. She plays Bloodstained Mire, then moves to combat. She attacks Ashani with Talion. Ashani takes the 3 damage, then Alana ships the turn. Ashani begins his turn, untapping and drawing a card. He moves directly to combat and attacks Philip with Ragavan. Philip takes the 2, and Ashani creates a treasure and exiles the Dockside Extortionist off the top of Philip's library. Ashani plays Taiga as his land for turn. He plays a Mana Crypt. He casts the Dockside Extortionist from exile. Alana's Talion triggers. With the Talion trigger still on the stack, Alana holds priority, then cracks her Bloodstained Mire, paying 1 life. This triggers John's Runic Armasaur. John draws a card. Alana resolves her fetch and finds an Undercity Sewers. The Sewers enters the battlefield tapped, and Alana surveils a Gilded Drake into her graveyard. Alana allows her Talion trigger to resolve, draws a card, and Ashani loses 2 life. Dockside resolves, and Ashani makes 4 treasures. Ashani casts Thrasios, Triton Hero. Alana's Talion triggers again. Ashani loses 2 life, and Alana draws a card. Ashani activates his Thrasios. John's Armasaur triggers, and John draws a card. Ashani reveals Mystical Tutor and puts it into his hand. Then he passes. Philip untaps and draws. He taps Arbor Elf to untap a land. This triggers John's Runic Armasaur, and John draws a card. Philip taps out to cast Wheel of Fortune. In response, Ashani casts Hydroblast, targeting the wheel. Philip, unable to catch a break, passes the turn. John plays a Wooded Foothills as his land for turn, then moves directly into combat. He swings the Runic Armasaur at Philip and Chatterfang at Alana. No blocks are declared. Philip takes 2, and Alana takes 3. John activates Deathrite Shaman, exiling the Bloodstained Mire from Ashani's graveyard. He taps out to cast the Meathook Massacre, with X being 4. In response, Ashani casts an Offer You Can't Refuse, targeting the Meathook Massacre. The Massacre gets countered, and John makes 2 treasures. Chatterfang sees the tokens enter and makes an additional 2 Squirrel tokens. John passes. Alana takes her turn, untaps, and draws. She casts Arcane Signet. She moves to combat and attacks Ashani with Talion. Ashani blocks with his own Talion, then Alana moves to end her turn. At the end of Alana's turn, John sacrifices a Squirrel token to target Ashani's Talion. This triggers its Phantasmal Image ability. With the Fimage Death trigger on the stack, Ashani casts Mystical Tutor. In response to the tutor, Alana casts Opposition Agent. John responds to Oppo with Crop Rotation, sacrificing his Wooded Foothills. This triggers Ashani's Talion, which hasn't been sacrificed yet. John loses 2, and Ashani draws a card, praying for counter magic for Oppo. Unfortunately, he doesn't find it and passes priority. John finds Gaia's Cradle and puts it onto the battlefield. Opposition Agent resolves, and Alana controls Ashani when his Mystical Tutor resolves. Alana takes Ashani's Lightning Bolt with a Mystical Tutor and puts it into exile. The turn passes to Ashani. Ashani draws and plays Misty Rainforest. He moves right into combat and attacks John with Ragavan. John takes the 2 damage, Ashani makes a treasure and exiles Dark Confidant off of John's library. He casts the Dark Confidant from exile. He casts Moxamber. He casts Seedborn Muse. He casts Basalt Monolith. In response, Alana casts Slaughter Pact, targeting the Seedborn Muse. Ashani passes the turn. Philip draws and casts the Delighted Halfling, then follows it up with an Elvish Mystic. He passes. John draws for turn. He plays a Windswept Tea. He taps his Gaia's Cradle for 3 green and casts Eternal Witness. The Eternal Witness resolves, and John targets the Meathook Massacre in his graveyard with the Witness's ability. John taps his Deathrite, exiling Alana's Bloodstained Mire from her graveyard to add a black mana. He casts the Meathook Massacre from his hand, with X being 2. Meathook kills most of the board, John gains 7 life, and his opponents lose 2 life from the Meathook triggers. Before John moves to combat, Alana casts Lightning Bolt from exile, targeting the Runic Armasaur. The Armasaur dies, then Meathook Massacre triggers, and each of John's opponents lose 1 life. John swings Chatterfang at Alana. She takes the 1, then John passes to Alana. Alana draws her card for turn. She plays Cephalid Colosseum. She casts the One Ring. She activates the One Ring, putting a burden counter on it and drawing a card. She casts Felwar Stone, then ships the turn. Ashani loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws for turn, then plays a Volcanic Island. He activates Thrasios, Triton Hero, revealing a Neoform that goes into his hand. Ashani channels Beseiju, who endures, targeting Alana's Weathered Runestone. The Runestone is destroyed, and Alana gets Underground Sea from her library onto the battlefield. Ashani casts Neoform, sacrificing his Thrasios. Then, with Neoform on the stack, Ashani reminds Alana of the Slaughter Pact trigger she missed in her previous turn. Alana taps out to pay for the pact. Ashani plays Imperial Recruiter with Neoform. Recruiter triggers when it enters, and Ashani reveals Phyrexian Metamorph into his hand. He casts the Phyrexian Metamorph, cloning Alana's The One Ring. and activates the One Ring to put a burden counter on it and draw a card. He passes to Philip. Philip draws, then casts Vexing Shusher. He moves to his end step. Still in his end step, John cracks his Windswept Teeth for a Dryad Arbor, then casts a Noxious Revival, targeting his Armasaur in the graveyard. Noxious resolves, and he puts the Armasaur on top of his library. John draws his card for turn, then taps his Gaia's Cradle for 2 green. He recasts his Runic Armasaur, then moves to combat. He attacks Philip with Chatterfang for 3. Post-combat, John casts Natural Order, sacrificing Dryad Arbor to find Witherbloom Apprentice. He passes the turn. Alana loses 1 life in her upkeep to the One Ring, then draws a card for turn. She activates the One Ring to draw 2. She casts Demonic Consultation. Ashani responds with a Mental Misstep, targeting the consultation. Alana casts Flusterstorm with a storm count of 2. She gets 2 copies of Flusterstorm, and all 3 target the Mental Misstep. The misstep gets countered, and consultation resolves. Alana names Sheoldred the Apocalypse with the consultation, exiling cards from the top of her library until she finds Sheoldred. Sheoldred goes into her hand, she taps Ancient Tomb, losing 2 life, and casts Sheoldred the Apocalypse. She passes to Ashani. Ashani wins his Mana Crypt roll. He loses 1 life to the One Ring. Still in his upkeep, he activates the One Ring to draw 2 more cards and put another burden counter on it. Sheoldred triggers twice, and Ashani loses 4 life. Ashani draws in his draw step and also loses another 2 life. He plays a Breeding Pool untapped, paying another 2 life, then casts Rograkh, son of Rograkh. He casts Invasion of Ikoria at 4, giving the invasion to Philip. He puts a Displacer Kitten onto the battlefield. He casts Crop Rotation, sacrificing Misty Rainforest. Kitten triggers, targeting Imperial Recruiter. Alana responds by casting Pongify, targeting Imperial Recruiter. The Pongify resolves and destroys the Recruiter. Ashani creates a 3/3 Ape token, and with no target, the Kitten trigger fizzles. Ashani plays Minamo, Schools at Water's Edge, and then passes. Philip draws his card for turn and loses 2 life from Sheoldred. He stares into the middle distance, then passes the turn. John draws and loses 2. He taps for 6, floating 1 green mana. He casts Professor Onyx. He upticks Onyx and loses 1 life to look at the top 3 cards of his library. He puts Mana Confluence and Entomb into the graveyard, then puts the 3rd into his hand. He casts Agatha's Soul Cauldron. John moves to combat and sends Runic Armasaur at Philip for 2, and Chatterfang at Alana for 3. All done, he ships the turn. Alana moves to her upkeep. She loses 2 life to her One Ring in upkeep. She draws for turn and gains the 2 back from Sheoldred, then activates the ring to put a burden counter on it and draw 3 cards, to gain back 6 from Sheoldred. She activates Cephalid Colosseum. This triggers Runic Armasaur. John draws a card and loses 2 life. Alana draws 3 cards and gains 6 more life. Then she discards Mox Diamond, Talisman of Dominance, and Mana Vault to the Cephalid Colosseum. Alana moves to combat. She attacks Professor Onyx for 4 with Sheoldred. John lets it happen, and Onyx takes 4. In her second main phase, Alana casts Lotus Petal, then a Mox Opal. She plays a Flooded Strand, then recasts Talion, naming 2. Done for the turn, Alana passes. In her end step, Ashani untaps his Basalt Monolith. At the beginning of his upkeep, Ashani loses his Mana Crypt roll, taking 3 damage. He loses 2 life from the One Ring, then draws a card. This puts a Sheoldred trigger on the stack. In response, he activates the ring to draw 3 more cards. This puts 3 more Sheoldred triggers on the stack. In response to these new triggers, Ashani activates Minamo, School at Water's Edge, to untap the ring. This triggers John's Armasaur, and he draws a card and loses 2 life. Ashani untaps the One Ring and immediately taps it again to draw 4 cards, then dies to the 8 Sheoldred triggers on the stack. Philip draws for the turn and loses 2 life from Sheoldred. He casts Elvish Chorus, then passes to John. Still in Philip's end step, John activates Agatha's Soul Cauldron to exile Delighted Halfling from John's graveyard. This puts a 1/1 counter on Chatterfang. John takes his turn, draws, and loses 2 to Sheoldred, then activates Professor Onyx's +1. He loses 1 life, looks at the top 3 cards of his library, then puts Imp's Mischief and Abrupt Decay into his graveyard. The 3rd card goes to his hand. He casts a Mana Vault, then he taps for 10 mana to cast Invasion of Ikoria, where X equals 8. On enter the battlefield, John gives the invasion to Philip. John puts a Razaketh, the Foul-Blooded, onto the battlefield. He activates Razaketh, sacrificing Chatterfang and paying 2 life. He tutors for a card, and then casts a Chain of Smog, targeting himself. Professor Onyx and Witherbloom Apprentice trigger. Talion triggers, Alana draws a card, and John loses 2 life. The Onyx and Apprentice triggers resolve, draining the table for 2. Smog resolves, and John copies it, targeting himself again. Onyx and Apprentice trigger again, and John shows a loop, infinitely copying Chain of Smog, targeting himself and triggering Professor Onyx and Witherbloom Apprentice, until John wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a game! Congrats to John on his win. He managed to draw a ton of cards over the course of the game and bided his time as his opponents dealt with each other's value and win attempts, then went for the win after they'd used up all of their interaction. Tonight's most valuable card, sponsored by Luxury Playstyle, goes to Runic Armasaur. The Armasaur drew John a ton of cards this game, and was so valuable to John that he immediately Noxious Revivaled it to the top of his library after it was lightning bolted. It helped him keep up with 2 Talions and stay ahead of the game. A big shout out to John and Philip this evening. You can get a chance to play on an episode if you become a patron of the channel. Tiers start at only $3 a month, and you get tons of benefits. That wraps it up for tonight. Tune in again soon to see who will become king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.